This is Debt Free in 30, where every week we take 30 minutes and get practical advice from industry experts about personal finance and living debt-free. Here's your host, Doug Hoyes.
There are not very many people who work in the debt help business and are regularly quoted in the media or who are on Twitter or any other form of social media. That's not surprising. Debt is an uncomfortable topic. While the media likes to cover the more sensational stories, making debt an everyday topic is difficult. On top of that, most people in my line of work have an accounting background, so we tend to be somewhat numbers-oriented, but that means we're often not very good at communicating stories. But a year ago, I started to see a name pop up in my Twitter feed, and I started to notice that he was building a great reputation tweeting, commenting, and writing about debt topics like those that affect my clients. Well, I'm happy to say that my guest today is now the newest member of the Hoyes Michalos team, our Manager of Consumer Insolvency, Scott Terrio. Scott, welcome to the team and welcome to Debt Free in 30. Why don't you give our listeners a quick background on your situation? So let me ask you some quick fire questions here. So question number one, where were you born?
Mississauga.
Okay, I've heard of that. Where'd you grow up?
St. Catharines.
Okay, that's pretty close tier. And then tell me about school after that.
Okay, so after I left the burgeoning metropolis of St. Catharines, I went off to the University of Waterloo.
I've heard of it. Yep.
And spent 4 years or so there, a little bit longer because I was in the co-op program, and that usually means you intermix work terms with school terms after some period. Did a few kind of, standard work terms that you do in that kind of thing. So some government, some science stuff, whatever. And then when I graduated, I ended up going straight to one of those jobs, actually, with the Ministry of Agriculture and Food, strategically located in downtown Toronto.
Makes total sense, yeah.
Now it's in Guelph. They fixed that just after I left. So when I left there, I went off to work for John Deere.
The tractor guys.
As you do, yes.
Mm-hmm.
And spent 14 years there, actually.
14 years.
Yeah, I was 10 years in the field, various locations around Canada. So what they tend to do is they tend to take the eastern guys and send them west and vice versa, just to test your mettle. And, if you can stick out 6 months in Swift Current in the winter and, not get lost or die on the road somewhere and they find your body in the spring, then they pretty much keep you around. So, that was my...
So what towns did you live in?
So I lived in Swift Current after doing a little bit of training and a lot of flying. Probably spent 20 to 25 weeks a year in the United States on various trips. They like the trips. And then I spent 2 years in Swift Current, less a day, as I like to say, for good behavior. They sent me back to Ontario, and I took over a territory right in South Central, right here, basically, around this area, Kitchener-Waterloo, and spent about 5, 6, 7 years doing that before I got moved into the head office in Grimsby to start up a new... It was called a sales support center, where we kind of handled dealers all across the country, and it was keeping things consistent in terms of marketing and sales and dealer development, that kind of stuff. So it was quite a broad view of things from a very, very large company.
Excellent. And we're going to get to what happened after John Deere next. Okay. So, I should tell the listeners that Scott and I first met in person over a coffee way back in, July of 2017. I guess it wasn't that long ago.
Doesn't seem that long ago now.
Because, again, I'd seen you on Twitter, seen you all around. I thought, I should meet this guy. So we went and had a coffee at the Starbucks inside the Longos, just in Brampton there, right beside my Brampton office. And at that time, you told me, hey, I'm quite happy. I'm working as an estate manager for a smaller insolvency firm in the Toronto area. So I said, oh, that's cool. We continued to, we connected regularly on Twitter and then as sometimes happens, life kind of threw a curveball that ended, luckily for me, with you becoming part of our team here at Hoyes Michalos. So perhaps you could describe a little bit about how you came to be a part of the team here at Hoyes Michalos.
Right. Well, first of all, luckily for me as well. So this is a two-sided
a win-win.
Win-win, yes. So, but it was, to make a long story short, I had a mentor at my former firm who was a great guy, really excellent with clients. The best kind of person you can imagine at, this kind of business where a lot of things are, viewed as very negative and making people feel good about themselves and, hey, this is just a bump in the road kind of thing. So I hopefully picked up a lot of that from him. He took a long-term illness, older fella, and ended up passing away last May after having been off for better part of 2 years and 2 bouts of cancer. So what happened, the result of that was I got thrown to the, kind of to the wolves, because I was covering not only 2 or 3 offices, but all 4, and great exposure to, a sound and thorough dunking into the waters of insolvency. So good that way. But to make a long story short, that health misfortune of his, along with a number of other administrative issues, led to the dissolution of that firm. And I don't even know the full story there, but the gist of it is the place I was working at is no longer. And so here I am at Hoyes Michalos.
Well, and when all of this happened, you and I started chatting again, and, we had lunch, I guess it was in November, just down the street. We're recording this in our Kitchener head office right now. And, we started to talk about how you could continue helping people from here at Hoyes Michalos. So what was kind of going through your mind then? Because you'd worked for a big organization in John Deere.
Really big.
And then, huge. I mean, we've never sent you...
45,000 employees worldwide.
We're not going to send you to the United States or anything as part of what we do. So how did that kind of all fit into your thinking about, well, okay, do I want to join you guys? You obviously had lots of other opportunities.
Right. Well, I spent a long time at John Deere, and then another 8 years at my former firm. So I think I brought a lot of my sales and marketing and people skills from John Deere into what I did in insolvency, and so that, combined with my mentor's tutelage, meant that I was pretty keen on not only helping people, but also it was kind of fun teaching people, because when clients come in, that's really what you're doing. You're fixing their problems. But if you do it right, you're also making them feel a little bit better, right? Because they're pretty down. And, they kind of teach their family members, well, you shouldn't, don't sign any joint debt with anybody, or, kind of the basics, right? That really society doesn't teach people. You don't get that in school. You don't get it. I think anybody who knows that stuff knows it from a parent who's looked after them and said, okay, here's the things you want to know about money and that kind of stuff. So a lot of this is educational from my standpoint, and partly how I got into doing media stuff was not only looking at what you were doing successfully, but also saying, hey, you know what, you can get your message out to people and really teach them kind of the basics about stuff they should do, stuff they shouldn't do when it comes to consumer credit and debt and stuff like that. And it's a really great vehicle for that. So. And
I think that's probably the main reason I wanted you on the team. You and I seem to have a similar approach to that sort of thing, that there is stuff people don't know. I mean, the whole reason I've done, 179 episodes of this podcast or whatever it's been, is to get the word out about what people don't know. I mean, you're a great communicator, and as I said at the start, I see you on TV all the time, and I think you've got a great way of explaining these concepts to people. And I also asked around, and I get the impression that individual people really respond well to your down-to-earth approach. So, walk me through. We know what you've done in the media and so on, and we'll talk about some of the places people can kind of read what you're up to going forward.
Right.
But you're going to certainly be meeting with a lot of people while you're here.
Right.
What's it like when someone comes in to meet with you? So they go to the internet, they find the Hoyes.com website, they fill out the form, send us a message, they call us in, and we say, yep, great, you're in the Toronto area, why don't we book you in to see Scott?
Right.
Because you're primarily going to be working in Toronto. So someone comes in to see you, what happens?
Well, I like to take a kind of a warm and casual approach with people. Sometimes you get people coming in with a real mess of complicated problems. Maybe there was a small business that's closed and now they're facing, the things that come with that, the business tax debt, that kind of thing, plus all their consumer debt. So you got a real complicated mess. Most of the time, it's more just consumers with more debt than they should have ended up with, and maybe they should be doing better than they are. But when somebody comes and sits down with me, whether I have spoken to them on the phone or not previously, I just say, tell me what's going on. It's open-ended, right? Like, I want people to get talking, because I want to spend a lot of time listening at the first sort of half of the meeting, and then the second half I do a little more talking, because then I can say, okay, well, here's where we're at, and here's we're narrowing your options down here now, right? Because you might have 4 options when you walk through the door, but I know now it's only 2, really, because realistically, here's what we're gonna do. And as you know, you've met with more clients than I have, but I think I've probably met with somewhere between 3,500 and 4,000 clients now. And you can tell pretty quickly what direction things are going with a lot of experience. But we also send a lot of people away, right? I mean, that's partly what trustees do, right? Is our job legally is to explain everybody's options and not to railroad them down a certain way. And so, if somebody comes in and they've got a lot of home equity and a little bit of debt, well, we're not going to have a conversation about insolvency for very long, right? But you're going to get a well-rounded overview of where you're at and what your legal rights are, what kind of things you should be doing as far as first step, second step, third step. In other words, you could maybe file a proposal, but that's not your first shot, right? You may want to talk to your banker first, right? And maybe tap your home equity. Maybe you've got family members that can help you out with stuff. Like, there are a lot of things people can do before we get to insolvency.
Yeah, and I think that's a key point, because of all the people who contact us, at most about a third of them are going to end up filing a consumer proposal or a personal bankruptcy, which means, okay, 2/3 or more are going somewhere else.
Right,
and you're right. It could be you got a lot of equity in your home, so maybe you can refinance, pay off your debts that way.
Yeah,
maybe it's a tax issue you've got, and if you have a tax person go through and get all that cleaned up, and maybe you don't have that problem anymore and you don't need to see us. So it really is a fact-finding mission at the start to figure out what the possible different options are.
Yeah, and even if you've spoken to someone on the phone on occasion where they come in and they meet with me specifically, you'll find out more anyway. When they come in, they bring in all their papers, and you realize, oh, there's also this and there's that. So that might change things too, right? You might have thought, well, maybe this is going to end up this way, and it might not once you realize everything that's going on. And part of the trick to this stuff, like I said, is getting people talking and finding out kind of a well-rounded view of them, right? Like, it isn't just debt, right? It's what do you own? What have you done in the last couple of years? Like, I want to know people's stories, like, what's your employment been like, right? Like, maybe you lost a job and then you got another job again, but for those 6 months you were off, some of that debt was run up by necessity. To me, that's the kind of stuff that kind of colors the story a bit. And so as your potential insolvency person, I want to know that, because I kind of know that this has not been, a lot of people think that people running up debt in a very sinister way, right? But 90% of the time or more, it's just people having life happen to them. And, I mean, even in the opening wording of the Bankruptcy and Insolvency Act is an honest but unfortunate debtor. Like, it's not meant to be punitive. It's meant to be rehabilitative in nature. So if you take that approach with people and build some trust early with them, right, then I think you can get them going down a path.
Yeah, I mean, I look at what we do kind of like what a dentist does. I mean, the dentist isn't going to say, well, you know what, for the last 20 years, you've eaten too much chocolate and too much sugar, and now your teeth are bad. You didn't floss 3 times a day. Well, okay, but, stuff happens. People get cavities. People play hockey and get their teeth knocked out. I mean, that's just the kind of way it is.
Playing the blame game.
That's
here.
right. It's
you're the one holding the drill.
Yeah, that's right. We're not having arguments with the dentist. That's for sure. It's much more important to focus on tomorrow rather than yesterday.
Right.
So, okay, regardless of why you're in this situation, what can we do going forward? One of the things that I think you've certainly written a lot about, and people can see a lot of your writing in places like Macleans, for example.
Yep.
And give me a couple of the other publications.
Yeah, so Macleans, Money Sense, and Canadian Business are the 3. They're affiliate magazines, but they're different. They tend to be different readerships, and so depending on the article you write, I mean, I'll just write an article because I want to, just think of something interesting and write it, and then I send it in, and they say, okay, well, this is more appropriate for this or that or whatever. But those are the 3 that I've been working with for the last year or so, and
you got lots more coming up with them.
I was just going to say, we can drip a little bit here. There's some big news coming out on that from our end, so it'll be you'll be seeing more of that stuff. Let's say that for now, just recently here, so that's good. But yeah, it kind of gets. It's a mixture of interest stuff with a little bit of technical, not too much.
Well, I know one of the things that you've written a lot about, and as I have too, because people in our business tend to focus a lot on this, is people don't still grasp the whole concept of a consumer proposal. Right. And to you and me, okay, that's kind of obvious because it's a pretty simple thing. Yeah. But the average guy in the street thinks they understand what bankruptcy is. They probably don't, but at least it's been a word that's been around for hundreds of years and so on. Yeah. Whereas a consumer proposal is a much new concept. And I think both you and I in the past have been quoted as saying, yeah, it's one of those things that it's I don't know the way you phrase it. It's one of those best kept secrets or
That's
something
exactly
like that.
how I phrase it. Yeah.
So why do you think that is? Well, first of all, give us the one or two sentences of what a consumer proposal is. I think everyone listening to this show knows
consumer
what that
proposal is a legal alternative to bankruptcy. That's usually my answer. And it's under the Bankruptcy Act, but it's not bankruptcy. It doesn't involve really anything that a bankruptcy involves other than getting rid of your unsecured debts in a different manner.
It's under the Bankruptcy and Insolvency Act.
Yeah.
So therefore it's
filing.
insolvency
Yep. And,
as opposed to bankruptcy. Yep.
Some people will understand it as a Chapter 13, right? Because, of course, we get so much of our spillage over from the U.S., and people phone me up and say, well, I want to do a Chapter 7. Well, bankruptcy. Okay, so it's not called that here. That's fine terminology. Yep. But it is a personal restructuring, I would say. Some people... It's better explained that way to them, right? So where you take your debt and you make a different deal legally.
It's a deal. That's a good word.
Yeah, yep. It's a legally binding deal. It's done through the courts, but nobody goes to court. But it's done through the courts, and it's filed with a licensed insolvency trustee. And
it can only be filed through a licensed insolvency trustee.
Yeah, nobody else. People will present that sometimes that way, but that's the only way it's done. And what you're doing is you're saying to your creditors, I can't handle this unsecured debt load. With all of its minimum payments and interest and everything the way it's at right now.
And unsecured debt means what? Give us the examples.
Yeah, so Visas, MasterCards, unsecured lines of credit, so non-home equity lines of credit.
So not your mortgage, not your car loan, but pretty much
your car loan. Anything where there's an asset tied to it is secured. So that's different. And anything that is, kind of in your wallet is unsecured, I would say. Income taxes included. If you owe
payday
income tax
loans.
arrears, payday loans,
those are all
installment
unsecured
loans. Yep. Anything that doesn't have an asset tied to it, where if you don't pay, the creditor has no recourse other than to sue you, really. So, and again,
if you've got a car loan that you can't pay, well, okay, you can give the car back and then do a consumer proposal, because at that point it's not attached to the car anymore.
Right. So the shortfall, if there's 10,000 shortfall, that goes from formerly being secured to unsecured. That can go in your proposal. Right?
So it can deal with pretty much all forms of debt, and it's a deal. And the typical kind of deal we would do would be, well, okay, you owe $60,000. How about you pay back 20? And I just made up those numbers because every case is different. It's whatever we can get the people you owe money to agree to.
Right. And trustees have enough, experience doing this stuff, as you know, that we can tell partly by the mixture of creditors, right? Like some creditors respond differently to, they want a higher percentage return, others don't. And that's part of the, when I said earlier, when someone sits down to meet with you, and within the first 10 or 15 minutes, if you've done enough of these, you can kind of see which way it's going, and then if it's going down the proposal route, you kind of know, okay, here's roughly what you're going to be looking at here because of various factors.
Yep.
And
and the math we're doing is we look at, if you were to go bankrupt, what would the creditors end up getting? And so in a bankruptcy, the more money you make, the more you got to pay. If you have lots of equity in your house, for example, you'd end up losing some of that. Right. So we do that math. Well, the proposal has to be a little bit more than that, or else they might as well just have you go bankrupt.
Yep.
And you're right. We know that this particular bank, they're always looking for this many cents on the dollar, whatever. So it's fairly easy to craft a deal. And so for the average person, well, not the average person, but the average person who would be contacting us, who perhaps owes $50,000 or $60,000, we can often work out a deal that, they pay off $20,000, no interest, over a period of 4 or 5 years, something like that. So with that background, here's my question. That was just a preamble. That wasn't my real question. Okay. This is the actual question I'm asking you. And that is, so that sounds pretty good to me. Instead of paying back $60,000 plus interest over the next 10 years, which is going to cost me $120,000, I can do a deal where I pay back $20,000. I mean, yes, okay, there's going to be a note on my credit report that says I filed a proposal, but once it's done, the debt's gone, and now I can start rebuilding. So paying $20,000 sounds a lot better than paying $120,000. Why do people not know about this? Why is this not a thing?
I don't think insolvency in general is on many people's radar. Before I came to this business, I probably knew just kind of what you were saying earlier, which is I kind of know what bankruptcy is, right? Okay, I'm going to lose my house. That's average consumer.
I lose everything.
Yeah, and I mean, I had worked in a fair bit of what you'd say financial sophistication. That might sound snotty, but with John Deere, and so I thought I knew a fair bit about money, because that's a lot of what that is, and still didn't really know anything about bankruptcy. And so of course I would know that much less about proposals, because years ago, there were more bankruptcies filed than proposals. And now it's kind of back to, it's more 50-50 now, because as people do get exposed to the existence of these things, and you can keep your house and all the good things about, doing a proposal, the numbers are creeping up, and they're about even now, I think. And
well, yeah, and in fact, in Ontario, there are now more proposals filed than bankruptcy. And at our firm here, it's, definitely, we file more proposals than bankruptcy.
Sure, because if you put that in front of people as an option, oftentimes they don't know about that. They come in and they say, I'm in a lot of trouble here, right? And they might think I'm going bankrupt, but we say, well, you might not have to do that. And it's always a better route out in a proposal, obviously, because you're not going to get a bankruptcy rating and all that stuff. So I think it's the best kept secret in Canada. I think you're right on that. That's the term, that's the phrase I use. Why it's a secret, hard to say, but it's probably just because 130,000 people a year file insolvencies and personal insolvencies in Canada, and that might be more in peak years, but it's still a very small drop in the bucket compared to 35 million people, whatever.
Yeah.
And I just think that this is not something that people come across in their daily lives, and it's also not something they want to think about, and that's partly why people get into so much debt, right? Is you look at the consumer debt levels right now, and people just put this out of their minds, and they kind of go on and they go on and they go on, and they kick the can down the road, and 20,000 in debt becomes 30 and 40, and then it just becomes a fixture in your life, right? And so you might go 5 years paying minimum payments, and where do you start, right?
Yeah, and you're right. If you've never been in that situation, then you wouldn't be aware of it. If I was to mention some strange medical condition that you'd never heard of, you would go, I don't know what I should do if I had that strange medical condition.
And likely never going to happen to me.
Right.
Yeah.
Whereas if I just got over having the flu, well, then I know exactly what the flu's all about and what I should do and how much rest I need and what I need to recover and so on and so forth. So I think for a lot of people, they've never been in that situation. And I guess the other part is, who has the incentive to let people know that consumer proposals exist? Well, not the banks. They want you to borrow money.
Right.
Not the, mortgage lenders, because they want you to borrow money. Not the car financiers, because they want you to borrow money. And everybody, the retailers, they want you to borrow money.
Much higher population of people who don't want you to know about it than people who do, right?
Right. And maybe it's not so much a case of not wanting you to know about it. They want you to borrow, though. They have no incentive to publicize it. And I think that's the reason that I think you're going to be a great fit here at Hoyes Michalos, because that's what we're trying to do, is get that word out that, yes, there is another solution.
It's just
here.
education, right? Again, we're back to the word education that I've written in my chicken scratch on my notes here. And, it doesn't hurt to know stuff, right? Just knowing about a proposal. So what? You don't have to file a proposal, right? But the thing is, I do a lot of presentations and stuff like that too, to various groups. And what will inevitably happen is if you speak to an audience of 200 people about proposals, they're all taking notes, and usually my presentation is only about 20 minutes, 30 minutes, but I'm there for 90 because I'm doing 60 minutes of questions after, and then they buttonhole you at the door on the way out. So, if I go do a presentation at 7 o'clock, I tell my wife I'm not coming home till 11, right? Because I'm not going to get out of there. I'm going to give out 50 business cards, because I think people see this in others, right? So the proposal might not be for the group you spoke to, but they all know 50 people. And when they go to have dinner parties with their friends, everybody talks about housing and debt. That's what they talk about, right?
Yep.
So I think people end up saying, you know what, that's interesting. I got a friend who's in a lot of trouble, and they would never touch a bankruptcy, but they might do this, right? Because this is a way out it's a softer landing, right? It's a whole bunch of good things,
a bankruptcy sort of has finality to it, which in a lot of cases is good. If you've got a broken leg, you need to put a cast on it. You have no choice. Yeah. But with a proposal, it is a negotiated settlement. Yeah. So you're not forcing it on the people you owe money to. Yeah. We go to them and we say, hey, we think this is fair. They have the opportunity to come back and say yes, or maybe we'd like a few extra bucks or whatever. Yeah. And then the majority has to agree. And I think that's why people feel a lot better doing a proposal, because, I worked out something and we all agreed to it.
Well, a lot of people use the term, I didn't ditch my debts. And that may not be legally accurate, but that's how they feel, and so it matters, right? So I think people feel that a proposal is, as you said, it's more of, I came to an agreement with my creditors, and they said yes, right? And so everybody's kind of happy here because, it's good for the person filing because they're out of their debts at, as you said, as much of a maybe 70% of a discount on principal, which is huge, right?
And no interest.
And interest is even bigger.
Yeah.
I always tell people, like, they say, oh, geez, that's a lot. I saved 70%. Well, yeah, but you also saved 100% of future interest, right? And you can basically double that debt over
Easy.
10, 20 years, right?
Yeah.
So the interest is just as big of an impact, if not more. And people feel like they've made an agreement and everybody's involved, right? And you don't also get the negative connotation where, I just kind of said, I'm out of here, right? And so, that's how people speak. That's the kind of terminology they use. So I like to use it too, instead of getting bogged down with too much technical and whatever. I mean, if you want some more detail, you can read one of my pieces and but that's when you sit with people, there's none of that, right? You just say, okay, what do you got going on, right? And you make it conversational. We end up having laughs sometimes. Like it isn't like a grilling, and it shouldn't be, I mean, the person should walk out the door going, wow, you know what, that was, I'm going to get out of this pretty well here. And I trust this person, right? And because there's a real veil in this business, I think, between the public and us that, geez, when I go in those doors, they're going to put a shackle on my leg. I'm not getting out of there, right? And so, and it isn't like that.
No, not at all. I mean, out of a group of 200 adults, one of them is going to have to file a proposal or a bankruptcy this year.
Yeah.
So it's not everybody, but it's also not something that no one's ever been through before. It becomes a lot more common.
And I tend to say too that it's a proposal is for more people than they think. So 100, 65,000 or 70,000 a year might file proposals. But I think if everybody knew about these, and that wouldn't be 5 out of 10, Doug, but it's going to be, there's going to be people that go, hey, wait a second, that fits me, right? Like that fits what I'm going through here, right? Because again, it's a softer landing. There's a lot of good things about it. You get to keep assets, right?
Well, you know exactly what your payment is, because once the deal is done, that's the payment. That's what you're paying.
And there's a finish line.
Yep. You know exactly. So if you start working some overtime and can pay it off quicker, great. It's done.
Or
quicker.
if you just see it right through to its conclusion, every payment you make, you're that much closer to the finish line. If you pay $300 every month, you get 300 less than next month you got 300 less to pay, or not 300 less to pay that month, but overall, right? So it's diminishing at a regular rate. When the finish line is.
As opposed to just paying interest and still owing the same amount next month. So, well, I think that's excellent. I think we've given everyone a bit of a flavor for what you and I and the rest of the team hopes to accomplish over the coming months and years, and that's to get the word out there that, there are other solutions. And I know there's lots of people out there who are, debt consultants, and they're putting all these crazy claims out there. But in a lot of cases, all they are really doing is charging you money to then refer you to a licensed insolvency trustee. Yeah. So you're better off coming right to the source and being done with it. So how can people find you then? So let's start Twitter. You've got like 10 million followers. I might be exaggerating a little bit, but
you are. So it's at Scott Terrio HMA. Stands for Hoyes
Michalos Associates. I like that. And
Scott Terrio HMA.
So that's
on Twitter.
So there's 3 T's in a row then when you spell it out. SCOT for Scott. Yeah,
so SCOTT. If you think you put too many T's, you haven't.
You didn't. And then TERRIO, Scott Terrio HMA.
Right.
And then obviously people can email you sterrio@hoyes.com.
Yep.
And then you mentioned it earlier, but what are some of the places that people can be looking out for some of the stuff you're going to be doing in the coming months?
Right. Okay. So I was, as I said, I was mentioning that with the Macleans Money Sense Canadian Business Group, we're going to actually be having a regular column. Possibly monthly, possibly every 2 weeks. And what that will be, it's going to take a form. It's going to be Q&A, which is nice because, they've got a big, it's Rogers Media. They got a big umbrella for, viewers and readers. They told me how it's incredible how many. And
a billion people.
They're going to ask their viewers and readers what they want to know about consumer debt and credit and that kind of personal finance stuff, right? So it will be around debt, though. That'll be the thing. And, we're going to put in maybe one or two, probably 2 questions every time because one might not suit, and you may look at the second one and go, that one either pertains to me or somebody I know. And I will give a detailed answer on what is all surrounding that issue. Whatever issue you brought up, I'm going to say, okay, here's, either here's where you've got this not quite right, as a misconception or something, and then here's what you can do to handle
and
this
there's
situation.
So many misconceptions out there. I mean, I look at the comments people put on our Facebook page, and every single day someone puts, well, consumer proposal, it's exactly the same as bankruptcy.
Yeah.
Okay, no, it isn't.
I know.
In fact, it's not the same at all. Yes, they are both under the umbrella of the Bankruptcy and Insolvency Act, but there's different time periods that they're in credit reports. You already talked about different ways deals with assets and so on and so forth. So I think that's going to be great having all those things out there. And then, of course, you also do your... if the TV station calls and wants you to talk, then you're there as well.
I'm there on Friday in BNN.
So there you go.
So thing on house money this week. So that's kind of a sort of regular thing. Just one more thing on the column too. Part of this is the internet is a dangerous place when it comes to this stuff. I mean, you and I both have seen lots of people where they come in, they say,
everything on the internet
web.
is true, Scott. I don't know what you're talking about here.
Some of the stuff that is people are advised on the internet is just phenomenal.
Yeah.
So part of it is just dispelling some of that too, right? Because there are facts, and then there's the internet.
Fake news.
So part of it is just strictly educational, and in terms of saying, okay, here's a typical scenario and a question from a reader, and here's why that, here's the parts of that are accurate, here's the parts that are inaccurate, here's the things that you can do, and whether it's something through a trust deed or not, doesn't matter. I'm going to answer the question, and it's going to be, you might have to go elsewhere to do this. Maybe a proposal's for you or whatever. It isn't going to be a Sally pushy thing. It's just going to be educational, right? So.
Yeah, we're going to try to stick to the facts, which is exactly what we want to do. So for anybody listening who is not following Scott on Twitter already, then Scott Terrio HMA is a good place to do it. Obviously, you can follow the Hoyes Michalos Twitter account as well, because we'll be tweeting all that stuff out, and I do the same thing at Doug Hoyes. So lots of information out there. So I think it's going to be great. So, Scott,
exciting.
Thanks very much for being here.
Thank you, Doug.
And I think that's a great way to end our first of what will no doubt be many appearances here for Scott on Debt Free in 30. That's our show for today. As always, a full transcript and links to everything we talked about today, including links to contact Scott Terrio, can be found at hoyes.com. That's HOYES.com. And by the way, if you haven't checked out hoyes.com lately, about a week ago, so we're recording this just at the start of February, we unveiled the new and improved hoyes.com website. It loads fast, it looks great on any device you use, but most importantly, all of our content is easier to find, and it's easier to contact us if you have any questions. And yes, all 179 episodes of Debt Free in 30 with full show notes are on the new website at hoyes.com. Next week, I have another very special show for you with 2 first-time guests, so if you have ever gone shopping or used a rewards card, you're going to want to listen to that show. So, until next week, thanks for listening. I'm Doug Hoyes. That was Debt Free in 30.